You've gotten dressed every single morning of your life without once asking a strange, obvious question. Why do humans wear clothes at all? Here's the strange part. For nearly 2 million years after your ancestors lost their thick body fur, they wore absolutely nothing at all, ever. By the end of this, you will never look at the shirt on your back the same way again, and here is exactly why. You'd assume humans invented clothing the moment they lost their fur, shivering through some brutal first cold night and instinctively reaching for an animal hide. Most people assume the opposite. Actually, early humans stayed completely naked in warm Africa for over 1 million years, using bare skin deliberately. That bare skin was never a weakness. Sweat glands spread across naked human skin let hunters chase prey for hours under a relentless African sun. You have far more sweat glands than any other primate alive today, all because ancestors traded thick fur for raw endurance, not for fashion. Now consider what this meant for the timeline. Clothing was never the ancient default. It arrived as a later solution to a colder problem. That colder problem finally arrived once early humans wandered north out of Africa, into landscapes where the naked cooling trick suddenly turned deadly instead. You step out of warm, familiar grassland into a frozen European winter, and your bare human body suddenly has nothing left to protect it. Somewhere along the way, someone figured out that a dead animal's skin could become a second skin, wrapped loosely around a freezing, shivering body. Neanderthals living through brutal Ice Age winters mostly draped raw, unstitched hides over their shoulders, tied loosely in place with simple sinew strips. This is where the story splits. Homo sapiens arriving in that same freezing landscape apparently did something Neanderthals never quite figured out how to do. Early Homo sapiens cut and shaped hides into fitted layers, sealing gaps at the wrists and neck where deadly cold could easily creep inside. That single tailoring difference may have quietly decided who survived brutal cold snaps and who slowly vanished from the Ice Age fossil record. Researchers comparing the two groups remains noticed one detail again and again. Sapiens sites kept turning up scrapers, awls, and tools built for stitching. Archaeologists studying ancient animal bones found deep, precise cut marks exactly where fur-bearing paws attach, a telltale sign someone carefully removed an intact pelt. Imagine this. A hunter kneels over a fox carcass, working a stone blade slowly around each small paw to keep the surrounding fur intact. But that was not easy. Raw animal hide left untreated turns stiff, cracks in the cold, and eventually rots into something unwearable within weeks. Ancient people solved this by chewing, scraping, and smoking hides for days on end, sometimes rubbing in animal brains to keep the leather soft. Here's the detail nobody expects. Almost every land mammal produces just enough brain matter to naturally tan its own hide, a strange, convenient coincidence. You crouch by a smoky fire for hours, working fat and ash steadily into a stiff hide, turning something dead into something wearable at last. Deep inside Siberia's Denisova cave, archaeologists uncovered a tiny sliver of bone, carefully carved and pierced with an impossibly small eye at one end. That object was a needle, nearly 50,000 years old, proof someone was already sewing fitted, wind-blocking garments long before written history existed. Here's what changed everything. A needle meant clothing stopped being a loosely wrapped hide and became something closer to tailored armor instead. Here's what actually happened next. With sewn seams, ancient tailors could layer hides, attach hoods, and close gaps that once let freezing wind inside. Picture a hunter threading sinew through punched holes, tightening a hood around the face, while howling ice wind pushes hard against the entrance. High in the Italian Alps, a 5,000-year-old traveler now called Ötzi was discovered wearing not one crude layer, but a carefully engineered outfit. Ötzi wore a bearskin hat, goat leather leggings, a woven grass cloak, and shoes stuffed with soft hay for insulation against brutal mountain cold. You lace up shoes stuffed with dry grass insulation, pull a woven cloak tight around your shoulders, and step out into thin, freezing Alpine air. But there's a catch nobody mentions. Warmth was clearly not the only reason people kept refining clothing once basic survival stopped being the only concern. Now here's where it gets interesting. Clothing eventually stopped being purely practical and quietly became a way to say something without ever speaking. At a burial site called Sungir in Russia, archaeologists found a body covered in roughly 3,000 carefully carved ivory beads sewn onto clothing. Sewing 3,000 tiny ivory beads by hand would have taken hundreds of patient hours, meaning this outfit was built entirely for status, not survival. Most ancient people had to work constantly just to eat, yet someone still spent hundreds of hours decorating a single outfit purely to signal rank. Think about surviving that ice age, night after freezing night, while someone nearby still found time to carve thousands of tiny ceremonial beads. You now face a choice ancient tribes face too. Dress purely for warmth, or dress instead to announce exactly who you are to everyone watching. Most people assume clothing began as modesty, some instinctive urge to cover the body out of embarrassment or shame the moment humans became human. Turns out the archaeological order runs backward. Survival came first, status came second, and modesty as we understand it trails far behind both. And this is where it gets uncomfortable, because the evidence for that order shows up in dye, not decency, of all things. In a cave in the country of Georgia, researchers found something that quietly changed how historians see the earliest ancient clothing entirely. Inside Dzudzuana cave, archaeologists discovered 34,000-year-old flax fibers dyed in shades of turquoise, pink, and black, long before any woven cloth existed. That means ancient people were choosing colors for their clothing on purpose, deliberately, tens of thousands of years before anyone ever invented a loom. Ice Age cave walls show painted figures wrapped in simple garments, a belted wrap and hood sketched by someone who saw such clothing daily. Eventually, a well-tanned pelt stopped being just protection and started becoming something worth trading between neighboring tribes for other goods entirely. A prime wolf or bear pelt could be traded for tools, food, or favor, making warm fur one of the earliest currencies humans used. But that's not the wild part. Clothing solved a problem parents faced long before any adult ever needed convincing that warmth mattered. A newborn loses body heat far faster than any adult, meaning small, carefully fitted infant wrappings were likely as urgent as any hunter's own coat. You wrap a shivering infant in the softest scrap of hide available, knowing this tiny bundle has less chance of surviving the night than you. Drying a soaked hide by open fire without scorching it took real skill, since one careless moment could ruin days of tanning work. Ancient people learned to hang wet hides just far enough from flame to dry slowly, rotating them constantly through the night to prevent any cracking. Consider how far this eventually traveled. Clothing helped humans push into frozen Siberia and, in time, cross into a completely unfamiliar continent. Eventually, tailored, layered clothing allowed small groups to actually cross the frozen land bridge that once connected Siberia to the Americas. Without sewn hoods, layered leggings, and insulated boots, that freezing crossing into an unknown continent would have killed almost anyone who attempted it. Some burial sites show bodies dressed in their finest clothing, suggesting an early belief that the cold and the journey ahead were the same problem. And once you know this, everything else makes more sense. Clothing was never just fabric, it was warmth, rank, memory, and belief stitched together. But clothing also quietly created a problem nobody had ever faced before either, one that lived directly against the skin, unseen and unwelcome. A warm, dark layer of hide pressed against skin for weeks made an ideal home for a very specific, very persistent, unwanted houseguest. Body lice, unlike head lice, can only survive by clinging to clothing fibers instead of hair, whenever a human actually takes their garments off. You scratch at your skin under a heavy fur wrap, unaware that the same clothing keeping you alive is quietly keeping something else alive too. Turns out, the truth is even stranger, because those exact clothing lice eventually became a way to answer this whole video's opening question. By comparing the DNA of human head lice against clothing-dwelling body lice, geneticists could calculate roughly when the two separate lice populations first split apart. Now here's the twist most people never hear. That genetic split suggests humans were wearing clothing around 170,000 years ago. Here's why that number should stop you cold. The oldest sewing needle ever discovered is only about 50,000 years old, not 70,000. That leaves a staggering gap of roughly 120,000 years, where humans almost certainly wore something, yet left behind no physical trace whatsoever. Unstitched, unsewn wrapped hides simply rot away completely within years, leaving lice genetics as the only surviving witness to that entire missing chapter. You realize the shirt on your back has a family tree stretching back through raw wrapped hides, all the way to lice DNA itself. Here's the last piece of it. You are not simply wearing fabric this morning, you are wearing survival stretched across hundreds of thousands of years. Every zipper, every seam, every stitched hem on your clothing today ultimately descends from a single tiny bone needle carved inside a freezing cave. So the next time you get dressed, remember the naked ancestor, the wrapped hide, the needle, and the lice that told on all of them.